In complete violation of the US Constitution, the Obama White House and the Peace Prize president has once again launched an illegal bombing campaign, this time in Syria, supposedly in the name of neutralizing ISIS terrorists. By brazenly ignoring Congress once again and claiming justification for the attacks under a 2001 directive which expressly limited military action to be used only against those involved in 9/11, Obama has yet again committed an impeachable offence. But aside from the legality of the assault, what's the true agenda behind US airstrikes on Syria? Are we to believe that the White House, along with Saudi Arabia and Jordan, two countries which funded and armed ISIS to begin with, intend to limit their attacks merely to target Islamic State militants? Or is the Assad government in Syria, which those three countries have been attempting to overthrow for 3 years, the ultimate target? And what's the wider agenda towards Syria as a whole? Here to break it down for us is regular InfoWars contributor, Syrian activist and blogger Mimi Al-Laham.
Today, both the US and Israel have attacked Syrian sovereign land illegally without a UN resolution or consent from the Syrian government. Contrary to what you may have heard, the Syrian government did not give permission and was not asked for permission by the US government. Simply being told that an attack is going to happen doesn't make it any less of a breach of sovereignty if consent is not given. I'm here to say we, the Syrian people, irrespective of any politician, reject and resist this illegal war. Almost exactly 1 year ago, the majority of US people rejected the war on Syria. That was when it was obvious that the US would be entering that war on the side of Al-Qaeda. But the wolf changed into sheep's clothing, and now many people believe the US is attacking Syria on the basis of fighting ISIS, the new Al-Qaeda. But that is not the truth. In this video, I'm going to tell you exactly why and how these airstrikes will not defeat ISIS. The US government and military-industrial machine have basically 3 excuses they cycle through to sell their wars to the American people. Number 1, democracy and regime change. Number 2, WMDs and chemical weapons. And number 3, fighting Al-Qaeda and terrorism. A decade ago, in the lead-up to the Iraq War, all 3 of these excuses were used. And these exact same excuses are now being used to start a war with Syria, from WMDs to regime change and now finally fighting Al-Qaeda, which seems to be the easiest one to sell. So please, don't buy it. Because even whilst the US was backing Al-Qaeda in Libya and Syria, some of us already knew they would eventually use them as an excuse to start a war. Indeed, it was the US foreign policy that created groups like ISIS, Jabhat al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda. It was Obama's support for extremists in Libya and Syria that led to the rise of Al-Qaeda in these countries. They talk about moderate rebels, but many of those moderate rebels defected to ISIS or are still fighting alongside either ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra, the other Al-Qaeda faction. You see, the US government creates the terrorists that it then exploits US soldiers to fight. Let Hillary Clinton tell you herself.
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded. Let's deal with the ISI and the Pakistani military, and let's go recruit these mujahideen, and let's get some to come from Saudi Arabia and other places, importing their Wahhabi brand of Islam.
You see, the US government needed groups like ISIS in order to weaken Syria before they could attack. Syria has a powerful air defense system, and the Pentagon admitted that it would make Syria difficult to attack. So again, I predicted that the US would attack Syrian soil once ISIS takes out Syrian air defenses near Raqqa. I said this in a video last month. Tabqa air base near Raqqa may contain S-300 anti-air missile defense systems. This is why ISIS, the US government proxy army, are now throwing everything they have at the air base and have been for the last few days. Without this airbase, the US airplanes could potentially fly over that region without being harassed by Syria's air defenses. And that is exactly what happened with the fall of Tabqa air base. And now, US planes are flying over Syrian skies outside of the reach of Syrian air defenses. But even after all of this, the US military is still afraid of Syrian air defenses, which is why they deployed the F-22 Raptor stealth jet for the first time ever. It's probably also the reason they quietly whispered to the Syrian ambassador at the UN that they are going to attack. But it didn't seem to help because they're still intimidated. They could only use Tomahawk missiles, not jets, on the west of Syria, where the air defenses are still strong. It's a big joke that the US coalition against ISIS includes Saudi Arabia, the country who has conducted more beheadings than ISIS this month. Saudi Arabia is an example of the kind of state that ISIS wants to create, minus the McDonald's, of course. Both coalition members, Saudi Arabia and Qatar, are the main bankrollers of Al-Qaeda. It's no coincidence that Qatar had enough influence with Jabhat al-Nusra to negotiate the release of UN peacekeepers. US airstrikes against ISIS will not defeat ISIS. Instead, more and more of these idiots will simply join ISIS, believing their cause against the US has been vindicated. ISIS ranks will swell, and the war is going to continue indefinitely. If the US really wanted to fight ISIS, they would stop their ally Turkey from giving them safe haven, medical treatment, and allowing them to cross the Syrian-Turkish border. If the US really wanted to fight Al-Qaeda, they would not let their ally Israel provide Al-Qaeda Jabhat al-Nusra faction with air defenses, medical aid on the Golan Heights border. And just today, Israel shot down a Syrian MiG that was targeting Jabhat al-Nusra in order to defend them. It's ironic that for the last few years, those liberal humanitarian warmongers were calling for US humanitarian intervention against Syria to save Syrian children. But when the US bombs ISIS and levels homes and kills babies in Idlib, these so-called humanitarians, including Amnesty International, are oddly silent. Killing babies in order to save babies? I think not. These wars are not about humanitarianism or protecting minorities or fighting ISIS. There are other objectives here. The US government's real objectives in attacking Syria is to destroy it, the Syrian state, military, and the country, breaking it up into 3 pieces, creating a scenario for perpetual war. They don't even try to conceal this objective. Andrew Tabler from the Washington Institute states this agenda quite plainly. The outcome of defeating ISIS will likely be a formal partitioned Syria, Assad in the west, a Sunni center, and Kurds in the northeast. He then states the breakup of Syria will break up the Syria-Iran alliance. These war planners believe that all the bloodshed is worth it. That includes a few beheaded US journalists. Now Kerry is claiming that Syria didn't uphold the chemical weapons bargain, just as Bush accused Saddam of doing the same. A year ago, when we were facing a similar attack on Syria, I said that the US would not attack while Syria still had chemical weapons and that they would try to disarm Syria first. This was before this scenario was even mentioned in any media. And I just said, the US government is not going to attack a country that possesses weapons of mass destruction. They first have to remove them. I said that giving up those chemical weapons would leave us open to attack later, just like giving up chemical weapons left Iraq and Libya open to attack. And almost exactly a month after the chemical weapons were removed, the US began attacking Syrian soil, just as I predicted. Now, Kerry's timely declaration that Syria didn't uphold the chemical weapons deal, it sounds like an excuse to attack the Syrian army as well as ISIS. Eventually, a cornered cat retaliates though, and one wonders what Russia's reaction will be. This is the part that concerns us all, and I assure you it is far more dangerous to your livelihoods than ISIS will ever be. In the backdrop of all of this happening, the US dropped its ExxonMobil deal with Russia. Russia has sent a cruiser to the port of Tartus in response to the US Tomahawk missile attacks from the Mediterranean Sea to Idlib. Russia has provided Syria with new air defenses and have said that the US airstrikes are illegal. The US government has flagrantly forgone getting approval from either the American people or the United Nations. It is wise to remember the breakdown of the League of Nations was what led to World War II. Are we now witnessing the breakdown of the United Nations? To all those patriots who love their country and sanity, I implore you to re-energize the sleeping anti-war movement. Stop this mess before it ends us all. We are the resistance.